Check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Hey, hey, hey.
Booger Nation. Booger Nation. I'm a citizen of Booger Nation.
One more time.
I can vote. I have all the rights. The trains run on time in Booger Nation.
All right. Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you here on Shat on TV Watchmen, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series, Watchmen. I am one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host and comic book wunderkind, the King Bee.
So glad to be back.
And this is our series preview episode where we dive deep into the cast, production, and history of Watchmen to calibrate our expectations of the latest HBO megaseries. Now, the King Bee and I first read Watchmen as teenagers. We saw Zack Snyder turn it into an on-screen reality as 20-somethings, and now, finally, one of our favorite show creators, Damon Lindelof, is giving the Watchmen universe space to grow and breathe and enter the mainstream consciousness. If you're back with us after watching other Shat on TV series, such as Westworld, Game of Thrones, American Gods, True Detective, or Taboo, you'll recognize the format of the show is going to be a little bit similar, but slightly different. The King Bee and I are going to watch The Watchmen along with you every Sunday on HBO. We'll watch and tweet on Sunday night, record on Monday, and release every Tuesday. So you'll have at least 9 episodes following this, probably with a wrap-up episode after that. We'll bring you our findings, more boiling it down than breaking it down, getting down to the core of each episode as quickly as we can. We know you got more important stuff to do than listen to us.
But not much more important.
So, King Bee, let's start off with the casting first. There is a cast in this TV series that is drastically different from the film's cast. So, of course, we had a 2009 Zack Snyder film. It is TV, but is not a drop in the quality of the characters. And let's start off at the top with the man who seems to be in charge of most things, Ozymandias.
Jeremy Irons is a solid pick. You can't.
You're fine.
Yeah, Jeremy Irons is a slam dunk with this character. Honestly, he should have been cast as Ozymandias in the movie. I'm glad they didn't bring back Matthew Goode. While he did a fine job, he just wasn't who I felt Ozymandias should be. His frame was small. He had the attitude, but he wasn't as handsome and he wasn't as athletic as I thought he should have been.
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago, I watched The Watchmen with several people at my house, and people were taking the movie very seriously. They were wrapped up in it. And mind you, this is a 3-hour-long movie, so it takes a lot to keep people's attention and stay serious in a comic book setting. Most people hung with it until they got to the Ozymandias part. And when you see the Adrian Veidt character played by Matthew Goode, there was some kind of snickering just at the overall lack of presence or lack of intimidation. He doesn't seem like the kind of actor that you can take seriously in a role this powerful.
Yeah, in the original book, he's illustrated as a very fit, athletic, but slender man. He looks like a young Paul Newman. I mean, you look at that book and you go, oh, that guy just drew a picture of Paul Newman. Goode just doesn't have those looks. He just doesn't have that frame. But his performance was there, and I think it did take up the slack and gave us a passable representation.
I watched all the trailers that have come out from HBO. I'm sure you have as well. And audience, if you haven't yet, they're pretty safe to watch. I don't think they're going to give away too much. They've done a really good job of keeping things under wraps. But one of the most intimidating and striking figures that you will see in the trailers is this character of Looking Glass. He's the guy with kind of the shiny face in the interrogation chamber. What do you know about him, King Bee?
So that's played by Tim Blake Nelson. You're going to remember him from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? He's in one of the Hulk movies, maybe 2 of the Hulk movies. He plays one of the scientists that later gets his brain swelled, sort of a nod to becoming the leader, if you're familiar with the character. In the trailer, he shows up in 2 kind of drastically different forms. One as sort of this mysterious, creepy figure with this gold or mirrored lame mask. but he's also showing up. He's got kind of raggedy hair and a trucker cap. He looks like a hillbilly. There's something going on in a sort of outdoor setting. He looks like an old hit redneck, really.
Now, I was way off the mark on this one. As we were talking about it earlier tonight, I was like, oh, this guy looks like he's going to be the next Rorschach. Like, kind of the similar thing, Rorschach, his mask was, what do you see? The classic psychological test. In this sense, you're looking into a mirror almost, the shiny mask. And I thought, oh, is he a spiritual descendant? But you had a different take on it.
As we're looking at how he's portrayed in these trailers, in one scene, it looks to be that he's in a chamber. He's interrogating someone. He's got a sort of dark and mysterious voice as he's wearing this mask. Outside of that, again, his hair, like I said, is kind of bedraggled. He's kind of wearing like a denim jacket and a trucker cap. He just looks like he's going on a fishing trip, and he just kind of seems slovenly. So there's this real dichotomy between who this guy is going to be, maybe when he's wearing the mask and when he isn't. I just don't know what role he's going to play, although we can tell he's going to be a main figure. And
it's interesting because in this world, this alternate reality that Watchmen takes place in, there is no internet, there is no cell phone. I wonder if this is sort of a metaphor for internet personas, right? So in essence, there are a lot of people who are from rural areas, undereducated, or rural areas, and much more ideological about their thinking. And they get online and they're a different persona. This guy is he might be digging dishes by day, but running his own subreddit at night.
It's interesting that you bring up the Reddit, because I think that we're going to see a lot of parallels between this show and how they kind of handle the different cultures that are at war and the factions that are at war, and our internet villains are acting in our real world today.
So we talked about Jeremy Irons certainly lending some star power to Watchmen. Another big star that Raj is super excited about is Don Johnson. Now, Don Johnson from Miami Vice fame, he was also...
He plays Kenny Powers' dad in Eastbound and Down. It is a transcendent performance.
Don Johnson appears as Tulsa Police Chief Judd Crawford. And that seems like a straightforward enough role, but NerdBot had a really interesting take on their blog about another identity that Don Johnson might be playing. And they point out that in one of the trailers, you briefly see Don Johnson behind the wheel of this craft that looks oddly like Archimedes from the movies and the graphic novel.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Now, if you're asking me if this is Dan Dreiberg, the Night Owl from the Watchmen movie, I'm going to say that I hope it's not. Dan Dreiberg was always kind of a nerd. He was a little bit of a do-gooder. He was a ninny. And Don Johnson's just a little too cool. Now, we know time has passed. He's had a chance to mature. But I would think that after all he's been through, at the end of the Watchmen movie, if he's still kind of the bookish nerd, then I'm going to say he's going to stay the bookish nerd and not become Kenny Powers' dad.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've seen with Watchmen is like, oh, yeah, that would actually make sense. Like the way this world is being developed by Lindelof, it makes sense. And for this to make sense, you'd have to have Dan Dreiberg like leave New York, move to Tulsa, Oklahoma, take on an accent, become really smooth. It just doesn't really connect. There are a lot of reasons why Don Johnson might be behind a Night Owl flying machine and not actually be Night Owl.
I mean, the easiest way you're going to explain it is that the government having outlawed superhero, or I shouldn't say superheroes, having outlawed vigilantes would claim and co-opt all of their technology and the things that they used. So the Owl ship or the Archimedes ship being used by the police, it could become part of the standard issue for equipment. It might not even be a police vehicle. We don't know where this plot's going. Maybe he finds the thing and the reason it's crashing is because he doesn't know how to fly it. But to lean even more into my hopes that it's not, I think that we should really talk about the character Laurie Blake, how those two were connected and why they're separate. Now, at the end of the book and the movie, the Silk Spectre and Dan Dreiberg, the Night Owl, have gone into hiding. They're aware of the crimes that were committed by Ozymandias, but they know ultimately there's nothing they can do to unring that bell. So they decide to go into private life and go into hiding, and they're in love and they're married. If Dan Dreiberg is in fact Judd Crawford, why is he choosing to use an alias while Laurie Blake, who was originally the Silk Spectre, now travels around under her real name, using the last name of her biological father?
Yeah, let's get into that. So again, backstory if you haven't watched or read Watchmen, Laurie Blake the Silk Spectre, formerly Laurie Jupiter, found out through some hints from her mother, and then, of course, through seeing reality and history through Dr. Manhattan's eyes. She is made aware of the fact that the comedian happens to be her illegitimate father. And so she's now taken on his surname for some reason, and we don't quite know that, but I imagine something's going to be revealed in this season.
Right. So the notion that she's operating publicly as an agent for the FBI under her, say, natural name, but Dan Dreiberg might still be using an alias, just doesn't come together for me. It wouldn't make sense to me that they wouldn't still be together.
So out of legacy characters such as Night Owl and Silk Spectre, let's get into some new characters. One that I'm very excited about and had a primary role in the most recent trailer is Sister Night. Now, Sister Night is a vigilante played by Regina King. By day, it appears that she is Detective Angela Abar. King, if you recall, starred in The Leftovers. She was fantastic in that series. And it's interesting because Damon Lindelof does not typically work with the same actor twice, but he broke the rule, sent her the script ahead of time with a drawing of what Sister Night would look like. And he's like, yeah, you want to do this? And she couldn't resist.
Her role in Leftovers was amazing. That scene on the bridge in season 2 is one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen in my life.
And King has upped her cred since The Leftovers. She recently won an Oscar for her performance in If Beale Street Could Talk, and she has directed episodes of This Is Us. She's going to be playing a dual role, and I think she's perfectly capable of handling it. And she's going to be paired up with Don Johnson, it appears, in her kind of day job role. So that should be exciting to watch.
I'm under the impression that this show is really about her and her experience. She's going to be our central protagonist.
And another film star that'll be playing beside her is Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. He was Black Manta in DC's god-awful Aquaman movie. He'll be playing Detective Angela Abar's husband, Cal Abar.
He really was the best part of that Aquaman movie, and Jason Momoa is an aberration.
But he gave a really great speech to the UN Council on Climate. I come to you as just a man, an Aquaman.
Did he say that?
No. Another screen star that will be in this series, seems like they're racking him up, is Louis Gossett Jr. of Iron Eagle fame. Very excited about that. He plays a character named Will Reeves. HBO has been very secretive with this character. All we've managed to glean is that he's an older man with a rich past, which can mean lots of things. I think that he will be one of those storytelling type characters in a drama that is racially charged, such as Watchmen promises to be. An actor of Gossett's caliber is likely to play either a tragic or a very powerful figure, so he is one to watch. I think he's going to be one of those sleeper characters.
I think he's going to be Hooded Justice.
I thought Hooded Justice was Russian.
He wears a hood. I don't think you ever see his skin color, ever. He's completely covered. And thematically, looking at the costume, it makes sense that guy would come out of a racially charged origin story.
I could see that.
So, Robert Redford is coming out of retirement. He's showing up, and he's going to play Robert Redford.
Yes, Robert Redford is playing himself as president. He has been president since 1992. If this seems far-fetched, remember that after Nixon, we eventually got to Reagan in 80. Former actor become president, had a very prosperous or disastrous career, depending on who you ask. Here we have Redford as president since 1992. Apparently, there are no term limits, so he's made it all the way to 2019. Remember that this is a world where Nixon never resigned. America won Vietnam. There's no internet. There's no cell phones. And we've seen Lindelof do a wonderful job of showing us alternate worlds as he displayed in Leftovers. So get ready for a sobering reality instead of a colorful fantasy. This is not the cheap route that a lot of shows and movies would take. This is going to be, I think, a very nightmarish reality akin to The Handmaid's Tale and other shows of that nature.
I think it's going to show us something really scary that maybe we're going to get to experience firsthand in a couple of years. They do an amazing job in the movie of showing a culture that kind of is just going to hang on to the 70s and never really want to change. And I think that this is going to be an excellent extension of that mood.
Now, the most nightmarish part of Watchmen, I believe, will be the introduction of the Seventh Cavalry. Now, in the trailers, you see that you have kind of these Rorschach-type guys, and you also see police with these yellow masks. And so, aside from being just visually jarring, there is a purpose to all this.
Yeah, in the beginning of these trailers, you see these police wearing masks, and in our current day and age, that's a pretty sinister look. But according to this history, it's not as bad as it seems. all these characters running around with these Rorschach masks are part of the Seventh Cavalry, which is actually a white supremacist group that appears to be the main antagonist of this season. So the group has co-opted an ethos from the writings left behind by Rorschach at the end of the novel. If you remember the end of the book or the end of the movie, after Rorschach has sort of discovered everything, he's sent all of his journals off to the New Frontiersman, which is just an independent newspaper, almost a conspiracy rag, really. And you understand that even though there has been this great cover-up, it's all about to come undone. Maybe we get to see the evidence of that in this story. I'd love to see that aftermath. But these writings were, by and large, just a drastic condemnation of society and authority as seen by a seriously disturbed and damaged mentally ill person. Now, Lindelof has come out and said, hey, your favorite anti-hero, Rorschach, he's not a white supremacist. It's just the fact that he's not around to say, no, you guys are getting this wrong. This is just something that got picked up by a bunch of 8chaners and they ran with it. So, how does the 7th Cavalry figure into all of this? Well, according to what I've read, in this story that we're about to see, there is a law put into effect by President Robert Redford that anyone who's been a victim of racial injustice or violence is now has a lifelong tax. They now have a lifelong tax credit. There is a group of people that start to attack anybody who's a recipient of this credit. That's where the white supremacy comes in. And the police step up to protect these people. The police immediately become systematically targeted by the 7th Cavalry, and as a result, don these masks to hide their identities, which honestly makes a lot of sense. They still want to help, but they can't have their families at risk. It's interesting because in this whole world, the way this whole thing started is that the government outlawed masks or vigilantism, and they said it was because of the violence perpetrated by these vigilantes. So now that we've outlawed this violence by these vigilantes, we have to adopt the very thing that we've outlawed to keep our peacekeepers safe. There's a lot of double talk and there's a lot of irony involved here, especially when you consider how we would consider mass police officers in our current day. I think the show we're about to watch is going to offer us some serious visual challenges in regards to how we kind of morally look at things and view things in the world.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because if you think of The Leftovers, which Lindelof did on HBO prior to this, there was The Remnant. When you first see them, they're this kind of innocuous group of like pushovers, basically, that they're just these religious wackos and, you know, whatever. And then you start getting deeper and deeper and you see there's a nefarious side to them, but then you get a layer deeper than that and you start to see that there's a logic to it. And I think that that's exactly what Lindelof is going to do here, that it's not going to be black and white. It's not going to be so simple, but there is a very mature dissection of what a simple thing can do to a society. So you think about The Leftovers. If you present that idea to most showrunners, it's going to be, oh, people disappeared. Let's solve the mystery of why they disappeared. Lindelof's like, they disappeared. That's the fact. Now let's get into what that does to people psychologically, what it does to us socially. I think it's going to be the same case with Watchmen. And I love, love, love that we went from simple comic book movies to grittier comic book movies that were still about punching people's lights out. And now maybe we're moving on to the era of a comic book series that is really getting into the psychology and social impact of vigilantism, of laws about vigilantism, and about overall societal control.
Regardless, I think we're all going to reveal some deeply held social underpinnings throughout the 9 episodes of this podcast.
This is why Big D is going to steer very clear of this podcast. And finally, before we move on to some of the production notes, I do want to point out that one character that we have not mentioned is Dr. Manhattan. And we saw Dr. Manhattan famously blue and very, very naked in the 2009 film. The trailers for the TV show seem to hint that he'll be back. If you remember at the end of the graphic novel, he left Earth. He was kind of just not concerned with our issues anymore. I don't imagine we'll see him like as a regular character in the TV series. I think if he does show up, it's going to be during some great climax or an abrupt ending. And I think that's totally okay because what I've seen so far of this show is this is a story about people, not gods. And I think that he will only be used as a plot device, not necessarily an integral character. I'm totally cool with that.
Honestly, if he never shows up or if it's just in a flashback, that's great. You know, when I was young, the first time I read Watchmen as a kid, the first thing I didn't like about it was there were no superpowers. Like, no, they're all just regular dudes. There's only one guy with powers. As an adult, I come back and I read it and I go, well, that's what makes it interesting is this is how it would work if there was one and the rest were just men. I like the idea that he leaves. Again, he is the plot device, and I want to see a world where these men are just left to their own devices. Now they know that there is something out there greater than the sum of all their parts. They have no blue dong. Just to know that that thing is out there and indifferent to their cause is fascinating. What would that do to a human mind, and how would that make society react? That's the story.
So we've got the story. Now let's talk a little about the production. One key thing to remember about the show is that we're 3 decades after the Watchmen book and movie ended in 1985. So this is a very, very different world. Time has passed. A lot of the characters aren't around anymore. New York blew up, so that was a thing. And we're really left in this very different world. So you may be fine not having read the graphic novel or watched the movie and getting straight into this series, but I highly, highly suggest you do.
Yeah, Lindelof has gone on record multiple times saying that this is not an adaptation of any previous work, that the book is sort of the Old Testament. Now, he referred to the book, not the movie. The show is going to be like the New Testament, that it's simply building upon the old word that was already there. He's referred to it as a sort of a remix. It lives in the same world, kind of like how the Shat crew lives in the same world of Genghis Khan and his great empire and continues his works in slightly different ways. The one thing we haven't nailed down for sure is if that previous world ended with a giant squid or a giant bomb. That's a book reference for those of you that enjoyed sports during high school.
Now, one Lindelof work that Big D and I are big fans of is Lost. I know a lot of the listeners pan Lost constantly when we get people writing in at host@shatontv.com. Lost always comes up in every conversation, whether we're talking about Westworld or Game of Thrones. I don't even know how they make that reference, but somehow Lost always comes up. I would say that Lost does hold up, but you don't have to be a fan of Lost. I think Lindelof has come a lot way since then, and Leftovers was great evidence of that.
I never watched Lost. Nothing I ever heard about it really held my interest. I know that it's a very polarizing show. I know that Leftovers was emotionally real and raw and human in a way that I'd never seen a television show really portray things like grief and loss. It's my hope that he brings a humanity and like a genuine human condition to this that the movie couldn't. I think the movie focused a lot on the melodrama of it. Carla Gugino's character and her scenes in the movie are, I think, emblematic of the worst parts of the Watchmen. I'm hoping for a slam dunk. I think we're going to get it. And I think we're going to get it in a single serving. I've read that Lindelof spoke at a panel at a New York Comic-Con where he said that this show is designed to be a single season, just 9 episodes and a complete story. He says that if this show generates conversation that warrants a second season, he's certainly open to it, but he's looking to do a one and done season and tell a complete story. I'd rather review one great season of a television show than 2 seasons of a terrible television show. American Gods.
Watchmen starts October 20th on HBO. Please, please, please join us here. If you haven't subscribed, do so already. We'll be putting out an episode every week and sharing our thoughts. If you listen to the work we did with American Gods and True Detective, we're going to spend very little time on the podcast telling you what we thought of it as far as I liked it or I didn't like it, and more actually getting into the guts of what was being portrayed on screen, digging deeper for those of you who don't have the time to do the homework, bringing up the references, bringing up the social implications, and we're happy to do that. That's what we love doing.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you if I don't like it, though.
All right, that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Watchmen. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcasts. The website is shatontv.com. If you'd like to give us some feedback on this episode and the episodes to come, please write us at hosts@shatontv.com. And thank you to everyone who stepped up, already wrote amazing reviews of the podcast off of our 5-minute podcast that we did to get the ball rolling. And thank you for subscribing. We've already seen a huge uptick of listeners coming in from Shat the Movies and Shat on TV. We really, really, really appreciate it. Again, we are spending our money and our time to bring this to you and hope that you find some value in it. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please be sure to leave a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, the King Bee, Big D, Dick Ebert, and Roger Roper, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us for rapid coverage after the October 20th debut of Watchmen. Thanks for listening, and have a great night.